Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The city's breath was a damp, metallic sigh against my face as I navigated the labyrinthine back streets towards the river. Rain, a persistent, fine drizzle that had haunted Oak Haven for days, slicked the cobblestones, reflecting the jaundiced glow of infrequent street lamps. My camera bag felt like a familiar, comforting weight on my shoulder. Tonight, my lens was set on the Redwater industrial complex, a sprawling, forgotten behemoth of brick and rusted iron that had slumbered by the river's edge for decades. A perfect monument to urban decay. My most cherished subject. It loomed from the fog-choked darkness like a carcass of some prehistoric beast. Its broken windows, dark, vacant eyes staring out at the turbulent black water. The rhythmic groan of its decaying structure mingled with the sigh of the wind through shattered panes and the ceaseless whisper of the rain. A thrill, part excitement, part a familiar, delicious apprehension, shivered through me. These were the spaces where the city's true, forgotten stories lay hidden, waiting for a patient eye, a listening lens. I slipped through a gap in the rusted perimeter fence, the metallic screech swallowed by the sounds of the river and the storm. The air within the complex was thick with the scent of damp concrete, mildew, and something else. A faint, almost chemical sharpness I couldn't quite place. My flashlight beam cut a swathe through the oppressive darkness, illuminating vast, cathedral-like factory floors, ghostly machinery draped in cobwebs, and stairwells that spiraled into unseen, blacker depths. Each footstep echoed unnaturally. In the profound silence, a small intrusion into a place that felt as though it had been holding its breath for half a century. I began to shoot, my camera a shield against the encroaching gloom, its clicks and whirs small, defiant sounds in the vast emptiness. The play of light and shadow, the textures of rust and decay, the haunting beauty of nature slowly reclaiming man's forgotten ambitions. It was all here, a photographer's dark paradise. There was a particular section, a vast, flooded turbine hall, where the river had breached the foundations, that drew me in. The water lay still and black, perfectly reflecting the skeletal remains of the machinery above. The only sound the constant, soft drip of water from the decaying roof. I framed a shot, the composition perfect in its desolation. Yet as I looked through the lens, I felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the damp night air. I paused, lowering my camera, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. It was the distinct, unnerving feeling of being watched, not just by the ambient presence of a forgotten place, but by something specific, something aware. I scanned the shadowy gantries above, the dark corners of the vast hall, but saw nothing, heard nothing beyond the dripping water and the distant sigh of the wind. I told myself it was just the atmosphere, the power of suggestion in such an inherently eerie location. Yet, as I continued to shoot, the feeling lingered, an unwelcome companion. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more frequently, my flashlight beam darting into shadows with a nervousness I rarely felt on these solitary explorations. The complex, which had initially felt like a treasure trove of decaying beauty, now seemed to possess a subtle, underlying menace. Its silence no longer peaceful but watchful, its shadows deeper, more concealing than before. In a small, cluttered foreman's office, a single rusted metal chair sat before a broken window overlooking the black, swirling river. A ledger lay open on a dilapidated desk, its pages fused, together by damp and time. As I photographed it, a sudden gust of wind, impossibly strong for an enclosed space, slammed the office door shut with a deafening bang, plunging me into momentary heart-stopping darkness before my flashlight beam found its mark again. My breath hitched. The air in the small room was suddenly icily cold. I fumbled with the door, my fingers clumsy, expecting it to be jammed. But it opened easily, revealing the same empty, silent corridor. There was no rational explanation for the wind, for the force that had slammed it shut. A sense of unease, sharp and undeniable, urged me to leave. I had enough photographs, I told myself. The complex had yielded its secrets for the night. The thrill of exploration was rapidly being replaced by a more primal, urgent need for the familiar safety of my own apartment. The journey back through the city felt different. The familiar streets, usually a comfort after the desolation of my chosen subjects, now seemed to hold a new, subtle threat. Every darkened alleyway, every unlit window, seemed to echo the watchful stillness of the Redwater complex. The rain had picked up again, blurring the streetlights into hazy, indistinct halos, the fog from the river coiling around the buildings like ghostly tendrils. When I finally reached my apartment, a small, slightly worn, but usually comforting, space in an old converted warehouse, the sense of unease did not entirely dissipate. As I locked the door behind me, a profound silence seemed to settle over the rooms, a silence that felt imported, alien. I shrugged off my damp coat, trying to shake the lingering chill of Redwater, the memory of that slamming door, the feeling of unseen eyes. Later, after a hot shower and a cup of tea, as I began to review the night's photographs on my laptop, the first truly inexplicable signs began. An inexplicable chill permeated the living room, despite the heating being on. It was a localized coldness, like a draft from an open window. Yet all my windows were securely shut against the driving rain. I wrapped a blanket tighter around myself, dismissing it as lingering dampness from my excursion. Then I heard it, or rather, felt it more than heard it. A faint, almost inaudible electrical hum, seeming to emanate from the very walls of my apartment. It was a low, subtle vibration, a thrumming just on the edge of perception, something I had never noticed before in all the months I had lived here. I pressed my ear to the wall, but the source remained elusive, the hum a pervasive, unsettling presence. And with the hum came the undeniable, skin-prickling sensation of being watched again, right here, in my own locked apartment. It was the same feeling I'd had in the flooded turbine hall at Redwater, that same focused, intelligent scrutiny. I scanned the room, my heart beginning to pound, but saw nothing out of place, no shadows that didn't belong, no tangible source for this growing, invasive dread. Desperate for a normal human voice, a tether to reality, I called my friend Liam. He was a journalist, grounded and pragmatic, usually the perfect antidote to my more fanciful or anxious moods. I kept my account of the Redwater shoot deliberately vague, focusing on the atmospheric conditions, the interesting decay, carefully, omitting the slamming door, the profound chill, the feeling of being watched. Even so, I could hear the concern in his voice. "You need to be more careful, Alara," he said, his tone a familiar mixture of affection and exasperation. "Those places aren't safe, structurally for one, and who knows what kind of people hang around them at night. Promise me you'll stick to daylight hours, or at least drag me along next time." I promised, a hollow assurance, knowing that the dangers I was now sensing were not of crumbling brickwork or human predators. After I hung up, the silence in the apartment felt even heavier, the faint electrical hum from the walls more insistent. Liam's rational, concerned voice had only served to highlight the irrationality, the impossibility of what I was experiencing. The feeling of being watched was no longer subtle. It was a certainty, a palpable pressure in the room, as if unseen. Eyes were fixed upon me, studying me, waiting. I double-checked the locks on my door, on my windows, a futile gesture against an intruder that seemed to have already bypassed all physical barriers. The city outside, with its relentless rain and swirling fog, felt less like a protective cocoon and more like an accomplice to whatever unseen thing had followed me home from the decaying, forgotten heart of the Redwater industrial complex. The photographs on my laptop screen, images of rusted metal and crumbling concrete, now seemed to hold a new, sinister quality. The shadows in them looked deeper, more concealing, and in one particular shot of the flooded turbine hall, I could almost swear I saw a faint, almost imperceptible distortion in the black water's reflection, a shape that wasn't there, that couldn't be there. My artistic fascination was rapidly curdling into a raw, primal fear. The night stretched before me, long and filled with an unknown, unseen menace. The city's remnants, the decaying spaces I had sought out for their beauty and their stories, had finally yielded a story I hadn't bargained for, a narrative that seemed intent on including me as its next, unwilling protagonist. The hum in the walls grew a fraction louder, a possessive, almost triumphant thrum. Something had indeed followed me home. The days following my unsettling expedition to the Redwater industrial complex were filled with a low, simmering anxiety. The faint, electrical hum in my apartment walls persisted, a subtle, unnerving thrum that seemed to synchronize with the persistent autumn drizzle outside. The feeling of being watched, though intangible, was a constant companion, making me jump at every unexpected creak of the old warehouse building, every sigh of the wind. Sleep offered little respite, my dreams filled with decaying architecture and indistinct, shadowy figures. My camera, usually a trusted extension of my own eyes, now felt like a Pandora's box, its memory card holding images I was both eager and terrified to confront. I had to know if the unease I'd felt at Redwater, the slamming door, the sudden chill, had somehow imprinted itself onto the digital negatives. Perhaps the photographs would offer a rational explanation, a trick of the light, a flaw in the lens, something to dispel the creeping dread that had followed me home. My small darkroom, a converted closet filled with the familiar, acrid scent of developing chemicals and the comforting glow of the red safe light, had always been my sanctuary, a place of quiet creation. But as I began the ritual of bringing the images from Redwater to life, the usual sense of calm eluded me. My hands trembled slightly as I immersed the first test prints, the silence of the room amplifying the frantic beating of my own heart. The first few images were as I expected. Stark, beautifully desolate shots of crumbling brickwork, rusted machinery, and the haunting play of my flashlight beam across vast, empty spaces. I allowed myself a small sigh of relief. Perhaps it had all been in my mind, the product of an overactive imagination in an undeniably eerie location. The power of suggestion was strong, after all. Then, an image from the flooded turbine hall began to emerge in the developing tray. The black water, the skeletal machinery, all as I remembered. But in the deepest shadows, near a collapsed gantry, I was certain had been empty, a darker shape now lurked, an elongated, almost man-like silhouette that had no business being there. I stared, my breath catching, as the details sharpened, revealing no features, only a profound, unsettling blackness that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. I quickly developed another shot of the same area, taken from a slightly different angle only moments later. The shadow was gone. I checked my contact sheets, my digital backups. No record of any such figure in that precise spot in the subsequent frames. It was an anomaly, a glitch, perhaps a reflection I hadn't noticed. But its form was too distinct, too suggestive of a deliberate presence to be easily dismissed. As I worked through the rest of the prints, more anomalies began to surface, subtle at first, then increasingly undeniable. In a photograph of a decaying office wall, faint, almost invisible markings now appeared under the enlarger's light. Not graffiti, but intricate, unreadable symbols, like some forgotten organic script, etched into the grime as if by a spectral hand. I had meticulously scanned those walls for textures, for details. I would have seen them. Another image, a close-up of a rusted metal door, showed a faint, ghostly face, seemingly embedded within the corrosion, its eyes dark, hollow sockets, its mouth a rictus of silent despair. I remembered taking the shot, focusing on the beauty of the rust's intricate patterns, seeing nothing but decaying metal. Now, this spectral visage stared back at me from the print with a chilling, undeniable clarity. The very air in the darkroom felt colder. The electrical hum, which had been a faint presence in my apartment, seemed to grow louder as I stared at these impossible images. Its thrumming vibration felt more than heard, resonating in my chest, in my teeth. It was as if my discovery of these photographic anomalies was somehow amplifying its presence. Or perhaps the entity itself was reacting to my growing awareness, my dawning terror. When I finally emerged from the darkroom hours later, the disturbing print spread out on my work table. The city outside was still shrouded in a persistent weeping rain. The normal sounds of my apartment building, the distant traffic, seemed muffled, distant, replaced by that insistent low-frequency hum. And now, the fleeting movements in my peripheral vision, which I had tried to ignore, became more frequent, more distinct. I would be reading, and a shadow would dart past the edge of my sight. I would be making tea, and a dark shape would flicker in the reflection of the kettle. These were no longer just happening in my apartment. As I ventured out, for groceries later that day, the familiar city streets themselves felt subtly altered. The shadows in alleyways seemed deeper, more animated, and I caught those same fleeting, insubstantial movements just beyond the edge of my direct gaze. The city, my city, once a source of inspiration, of endless photographic subjects, now felt like a landscape of potential menace, its familiar corners imbued with a new, unsettling ambiguity. The very fabric of my reality seemed to be fraying, the line between the seen and the unseen, the real and the imagined, becoming dangerously, terrifyingly blurred. My camera, my tool for capturing truth, had instead captured an impossible, encroaching horror. That evening I called Liam again, my voice tight with a fear I could no longer conceal. I described the photographs, the shadows, the symbols, the impossible faces, the growing hum, the peripheral movements that now seemed to follow me everywhere. I could hear the concern in his voice, but also the familiar note of gentle skepticism, the well-meaning attempt to find rational explanations. "Alara, it sounds like classic pareidolia with the photos," he said, his tone soothing. "The mind seeing patterns in random shapes, especially when you're stressed or working in low light. And the hum, the shadows, old buildings, old cities, They play tricks. You're an artist. You have a vivid imagination. Perhaps you're just internalizing the atmosphere of those places a little too much. His words, meant to comfort, only deepened my sense of isolation. He didn't understand. He couldn't see the prints, couldn't feel the oppressive watchfulness, couldn't hear the insidious hum that was even now a low, thrumming counterpoint to our conversation. I was alone with this, my most trusted friend, unable to bridge the widening chasm between my terrifying reality and his well-ordered, rational world. As I was staring at one particularly unsettling print from Redwater, the one with the elongated shadow in the turban hall, a new horror unfolded. The shadow in the photograph, the one I had studied for hours, seemed to subtly, almost imperceptibly, deepen. Its edges sharpened for a fraction of a second, and I could have sworn, though it was impossible, that the faintest suggestion of two pinprick eyes gleamed from its dark, amorphous core. I gasped, dropping the print as if it had burned me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was I hallucinating now? Was the strain finally breaking my mind? I snatched up the photograph again, my hands trembling. The shadow was as it had been before, indistinct, featureless. Had I imagined that fleeting, terrifying intensification, that momentary glimpse of watching eyes? The electrical hum in the room spiked, becoming a distinct audible throb that made the floorboards vibrate beneath my feet. The lights in my apartment flickered violently, then dimmed to a sickly, weak glow. The rain outside, which had been a steady drizzle, suddenly intensified, lashing against the windows with a furious, elemental rage, as if mirroring the terror that had just seized me. The photographs were not just passive records of an unsettling experience. They were something more. They were conduits, perhaps, or active windows into whatever malevolent consciousness resided in the city's forgotten spaces. An entity that was now aware of me, that was now focusing its attention, its power, directly upon me. My art, my passion, had become a beacon, attracting an unimaginable, unseen horror. The remnants of the city were indeed alive, and they were not content to remain forgotten echoes in decaying buildings. They were reaching out, through my lens, through the developing chemicals, through the very fabric of my perception, their unseen eyes fixed upon me, their silent, ancient hunger now palpable in the very air I breathed. My fears were no longer just developing. They had fully, terrifyingly materialized. The photograph, with its subtly shifting shadow and the almost imagined glint of watching eyes, became a focal point for my escalating dread. My apartment, once a refuge from Oakhaven's melancholic, rain-swept streets, now felt like a cage. The faint electrical hum in its walls, a constant, unnerving reminder of the unseen presence that had followed me home from the Redwater industrial complex. Sleep was a battlefield of fragmented, shadowy nightmares, and daylight offered little respite from the gnawing anxiety that had taken root in my soul. The feeling of being watched was no longer confined to the late hours or the eerie desolation of abandoned places. It had seeped into the very fabric of my daily life, a constant, invisible pressure at the edge of my perception. Walking through the familiar streets of Oakhaven, even in the bustling heart of the city, I felt it. A cold, intelligent scrutiny that seemed to emanate from the ancient, rain-stained stones of the buildings, from the darkened windows of passing trams, from the very air itself. Familiar landmarks, buildings I had passed 1,000 times without a second thought now seemed to possess a new sinister character. The ornate gargoyles on the old cathedral appeared to follow me with their stone eyes. The intricate ironwork of Victorian balconies seemed to twist into leering skeletal faces. The city, my city, was transforming before my very eyes. It's comforting. Anonymity replaced by a pervasive, watchful malevolence. It was the reflections that were the most overtly terrifying. Catching my own image in a rain-slicked shop window, I would see it. A fleeting, shadowy figure standing just behind me. Its form indistinct, its presence chillingly undeniable. The moment I would spin around, heart hammering, there would be nothing there but the empty, indifferent street. Or, staring into a puddle mirroring the bruised, overcast sky, I would glimpse a distorted, spectral face looking up at me, its eyes wide with a silent, ancient sorrow, before the image dissolved into the ripples of a falling raindrop. These were not mere tricks of the light, not the playful pareidolia my friend Liam had suggested. They were too specific, too frequent, too closely tied to the growing sense of an unseen entity focusing its attention upon me. The city itself seemed to be using its reflective surfaces, its wet pavements, its glass, its dark waters, as a canvas upon which to paint its unsettling spectral messages, all directed at me. Driven by a desperate need to understand the sigh, source of this encroaching horror, I began to delve into the history of the Redwater industrial complex with a renewed, almost feverish intensity. If the entity had originated there, then perhaps its secrets, its weaknesses, lay buried in the archives, in the forgotten records of Oakhaven's past. My days became a blur of dusty ledgers, faded newspaper microfilms, and obscure local history forums. The official records were frustratingly scant, detailing only the complex's construction in the late 19th century, its brief period of industrial productivity, and its abrupt, unexplained closure in the early 1930s due to economic downturn and unforeseen structural concerns. There was no mention of accidents, no hint of tragedy, only a bland, bureaucratic silence that felt like a deliberate, careful obfuscation of some darker truth. Unofficial sources, however, painted a more disturbing picture. Buried in rambling, anecdotal accounts on a local folklore website, I found vague references to Redwater being built on unhallowed ground, a place where the river's currents were said to be unnatural, and where things from the deep mist sometimes came ashore. There were whispers of strange lights seen hovering over the complex shortly before its closure, of watchmen who had vanished without a trace. These were just stories, of course, the kind of unsubstantiated tales that cling to any old, abandoned place. Yet, they resonated with a chilling familiarity, echoing the anomalies in my photographs, the oppressive atmosphere I had experienced within Redwater's decaying walls. The symbols I had seen in the prints, those strange, organic glyphs, were not mentioned, but the sense of a long-held, sinister secret was undeniably present in these fragmented narratives. I spoke to Liam again, my voice tight with a fear I could no longer entirely conceal, trying to articulate the connections I was making, the sheer, overwhelming strangeness of it all. He listened patiently, his concern for my well-being evident, yet his skepticism remained a palpable barrier between us. "Ilara," he said gently, "you're a photographer of decay, of forgotten places. It's your job to see the hidden, the overlooked. But sometimes the shadows are just shadows. You're under a lot of stress," he continued, his voice reasonable, kind, yet utterly uncomprehending of the true nature of my terror. This freelance life, the late hours, the isolation, it can get to you. Maybe you need a break, a change, of scenery, something brighter. His words, meant to soothe, only highlighted my profound aloneness in this. He saw a stressed artist. I saw a city that was actively, intelligently, haunting me. His well-meaning dismissal, his inability to grasp the reality of what I was experiencing, was a new kind of pain, a confirmation of my isolation. If even Liam, my closest friend, could not see it, then who would? I was adrift, with only my terrifying photographs and the city's watchful, predatory gaze as my companions. The rain outside my window seemed to weep in sympathy, or perhaps in quiet, knowing mockery. That evening, while poring over an old hand-drawn map of the Oak Haven River District from the early 1800s, long before Redwater was built, I found it. A tiny, almost invisible annotation near the bend in the river where the complex now stood. The ink was faded, the script archaic, but I could just make out the words: Locus umbrarum, cave anguis, place of shadows, beware the serpent. A shiver traced its way down my spine. Beware the serpent. What serpent? Was it a literal creature, a forgotten piece of local wildlife? Or was it something else, something symbolic, something connected to the tentacled eye-like symbols I had seen? In Josiah Croft's logbook from that other, unrelated historical terror, now bleeding into this one, the thought of such a connection, such a shared ancient motif of malevolence, was deeply unsettling. Self-correction. My apologies. The reference to Josiah Croft's logbook and the tentacled eye-like symbols seems to be a bleed-through from the previous story, The Lighthouse of Lost Souls. I will adjust to be specific to City Remnants lore for the next paragraph. My mistake. The reference to Josiah Croft's logbook was a confusion with a previous narrative. Instead, the unsettling symbols from the Redwater photographs themselves, those strange organic glyphs, now seem to resonate with this ancient warning on the map. Beware the serpent. Could those symbols be a representation of this serpent, this ancient entity tied to the river, to the very foundations of Redwater? The implications were terrifying. As this realization struck me, as I stared at the ancient map and the chilling Latin warning, the streetlights outside my apartment window, which had been casting their usual steady orange glow, flickered violently, then extinguished one by one, plunging my entire street into an unnerving, premature darkness. The rain still fell, but now it was a black, impenetrable curtain, and the silence that followed the extinguishing of the lights was profound, absolute. My heart leaped into my throat. This was no ordinary power outage. It was too localized, too specific, too perfectly timed with my discovery. The city was not just watching me, it was responding to my investigation, to my proximity to its secrets. The darkness outside felt alive, a tangible presence pressing against my windows, and within it, I sensed that familiar, cold, intelligent scrutiny, now closer, more focused than ever before. I scrambled to light a candle, its small, flickering flame a pathetic defense against the encroaching, unnatural night. The electrical hum in my walls, which had been a constant, low thrum, now seemed to pulse with a new, stronger energy, almost like a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the watching city. And from the street below, carried on the rain-swept wind, I heard it, a faint, sibilant whisper, the same sound I had heard in the static, but clearer now, closer. just outside my door. The city's watchful gaze was no longer passive. It had become active, responsive, and undeniably hostile. My research into Redwater, my attempts to understand the anomalies in my photographs, had not brought me clarity, but had instead drawn me deeper into the city's dark, hidden heart, marking me as a target for its ancient, unseen, and now, clearly, malevolent consciousness. The remnants of the city were stirring, and they knew my name. The localized blackout on my street, the chillingly clear whisper of my name from the darkness beyond my door, had shattered any lingering illusion of safety. The entity I had disturbed in the decaying heart of the Redwater industrial complex was not confined to its forgotten ruins. It was aware of me. It was mobile, and it was undeniably hostile. Each night now, as the rain-swept darkness of Oakhaven descended, I felt like a hunted animal, trapped within a city that had become a vast, sentient web of unseen connections and malevolent intent. The phone calls began a few days later, always in the dead of night, when the city was at its quietest and my nerves were at their most frayed. The caller ID would show unknown or a string of impossible, garbled numbers. When I answered, my heart pounding, there would be no voice, only a rush of harsh, crackling static, so loud it made my ears ring. And within that static, if I listened closely enough, I could discern them, the faint, sibilant whispers, the chorus of indistinct, sorrowful voices I had first heard at Redwater. Sometimes, the whispers would seem to coalesce into a single, drawn-out syllable that sounded chillingly like my name, E-La-Ra, dragged out and distorted, as if spoken by a multitude of ancient, decaying lungs. Other times it was just a cacophony of hushed, mournful sounds, the collective grief of forgotten souls, amplified and broadcast directly into my ear through the mundane technology of my telephone. Each call left me trembling, a cold sweat on my skin, the silence that followed even more terrifying than the static itself. My electronic devices, once tools of my trade, my connection to the world, became instruments of torment. My laptop would freeze inexplicably whenever I tried to research Oakhaven's more obscure historical societies or forums discussing urban legends. My digital camera, my trusted companion, began to corrupt image files from perfectly normal daylight shoots, overlaying them with faint, ghostly static or subtle, shadowy distortions that hadn't been there when I took the picture. The electrical hum in my apartment walls became a constant, almost audible thrum. The fleeting, shadowy figures I had once glimpsed only in my peripheral vision now became more brazen, more direct. I would see them in the reflection of a darkened shop window as I hurried home from a late assignment, a tall, distorted silhouette mimicking my every move, only to vanish when I spun around. In the polished chrome of a subway car, I'd see a gaunt, spectral face staring back at me from beside my own reflection, its eyes hollow, its expression one of profound, ancient hunger. These were not tricks of the light, not anymore. They were the same entities, the same city remnants I had captured in my photographs from Redwater, now freed from the confines of those decaying walls, or perhaps having always possessed the ability to traverse the city's hidden pathways. Their attention, now irrevocably fixed upon me, they were using the city's reflective surfaces, its rain-slicked streets, its myriad panes of glass, even the dark screen of my turned-off television, as windows into my world, or perhaps as mirrors showing me glimpses of their own. Began to feel the city's very infrastructure was complicit in my haunting. The electrical hum in my walls seemed to intensify whenever the shadowy figures appeared in reflections, as if they were drawing power from the ancient, unseen network of wires that ran beneath the streets. During heavy rainstorms, the whispers that seemed to rise from storm drains and sewer grates carried on the chilling drafts from the city's subterranean depths. The entire metropolis felt like a vast, interconnected nervous system, and I was a single, terrified nerve ending, raw and exposed. My attempts to seek help, to find some rational explanation, or even just a sympathetic ear, were met with a wall of polite disbelief, further deepening my sense of isolation. I tried to explain my experiences to Liam, my voice tight with a desperation I couldn't conceal. But even he, my most trusted friend, struggled to comprehend the true nature of my terror. He listened with concern, yes, but his suggestions, stress, fatigue, and overactive artistic imagination, felt like pats on the head, dismissals of a reality that was rapidly consuming me. Alara, maybe you just need a break from all this. Darkness, he'd said gently, after I'd tried to describe the figures in the reflections, the static on the phone line. You're immersing yourself in these decaying places, in these sad stories. It's bound to affect your perception. His words, though well-intentioned, left me feeling more alone than ever, adrift in a sea of encroaching horror that no one else could see or understand. The local authorities were out of the question. What would I tell them? That shadows were following me? That the city's infrastructure was whispering my name? They would deem me unhinged, a waste of their time, or worse. I was trapped, not just by the entity, but by the very plausibility of my own experiences in a world that prided itself on logic and tangible proof. My fear was my own, a solitary burden. The entities, however, seemed to revel in my isolation, their torment becoming more focused, more personal. One evening, as I sat numbly staring at my computer screen, trying to work on a mundane photo editing assignment, the screen suddenly went black. Then, words began to type themselves out, letter by agonizing letter, in a stark white font against the black void. We see you, Alara. We know your fears. You cannot hide from the city's heart. My breath hitched, a strangled gasp of pure terror. This was no glitch, no random system error. This was direct communication, a clear, unambiguous message from the entity that was stalking me, a chilling confirmation of its intelligence, its reach into my most private, technologically secured spaces. The electrical hum in the room surged, and the faint scent of river mud and old, wet stone, the scent of Redwater, filled my apartment. Before I could react, before I could even scream, the message vanished, replaced by my normal desktop background, as if nothing had happened. But I was trembling, my hands slick with cold sweat. The entity wasn't just watching, wasn't just whispering. It was actively engaging, taunting, demonstrating its power, its ability to infiltrate every aspect of my life, even the digital realm I had once considered a safe haven. The city's infrastructure, its power lines, its data cables, its reflective surfaces, its hidden subterranean pathways. These were not just passive elements of the urban landscape. They were the entity's nerves, its senses, its conduits. It was a consciousness woven into the very fabric of Oakhaven, a silent, watchful presence that had awakened, or been awakened by me, and was now inexorably, terrifyingly, drawing me into its dark, forgotten heart. My apartment, once a small pocket of familiarity in the vast, indifferent city, now felt like the epicenter of its attention. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed deeper, more watchful. The hum in the walls was a constant, low thrumming that vibrated in my bones. Every flicker of a light, every crackle of static from my speakers was a potential message, a potential threat. I was no longer just a photographer of urban decay. I was a participant in its ongoing, hidden life, an unwilling actor in a drama whose rules I didn't understand, whose stakes were terrifyingly high. The city's remnants were not just in its abandoned buildings. They were in its very bloodstream, and they had found a fresh interest in mine. My camera, once a tool for capturing beauty and desolation, now felt like the instrument that had inadvertently signed my own death warrant, or worse. The rain continued to fall outside, a ceaseless, weeping curtain that seemed to isolate my building, my apartment, from the rest of the world. I was alone, with the city's watchful gaze fixed upon me, its whispers a constant, insidious presence in the static on the line, its shadows dancing just beyond the edge of my sight, in every pane of glass. The web was not just tightening, it was actively, intelligently pulling me in. The chilling typed message on my computer screen. "We see you, Alara. We know your fears," had been a declaration of war from an unseen, pervasive enemy. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like the very heart of its insidious web. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by nights spent listening to the city's mournful, rain-swept sighs and the constant, low, thrumming hum that seemed to vibrate from the very bones of Oakhaven. My isolation was no longer just a feeling. It was a carefully constructed prison. I began to observe the patterns of its harassment with a desperate, analytical focus. The electrical hum, I noticed, was always stronger near power outlets, along the path of concealed wiring in my walls, as if the entity were drawing sustenance from the city's lifeblood, or using its network as a conduit for its presence. Streetlights outside my window didn't just flicker randomly. They dimmed or flared with an almost intelligent responsiveness as I moved within my rooms, their erratic pulses a silent, watchful commentary. When I dared to venture out into the rain-swept streets for essential supplies, the city itself felt like an extension of its power. The familiar overhead cables of the old tram lines would sometimes spark and hiss as I passed beneath them, and the lights in the subway tunnels would flicker in long, unsettling waves as my train rattled through. It was as if the entire urban infrastructure, its wires, its pipes, its hidden, forgotten pathways, had become the entity's sensory organs, its means of tracking and tormenting me. The whispers, too, were no longer confined to my phone, line, or the static of my radio. I started hearing them in the most unexpected, mundane places. A faint, sibilant hissing from the old radiator pipes in my bathroom as the steam rose. A chorus of indistinct, sorrowful murmurs from the ventilation shaft above my bed in the dead of night. Once, a chillingly clear sigh, like a breath of profound weariness, seemed to emanate from a cracked pavement stone I stepped upon during a rare, foggy afternoon walk. These were not the sounds of a city settling, or of my own overwrought imagination. They were too specific, too closely tied to my presence, to my growing awareness of this unseen, urban consciousness. The city was whispering its secrets, its sorrows, its malevolence, directly to me, through every crack, every conduit, every forgotten interstitial space. My fascination with urban decay had, it seemed, made me uniquely attuned to its darkest, most spectral frequencies. Feeling hunted even in my own home, a desperate idea began to form. If the entity was tied to these forgotten, decaying spaces, if Redwater had been its initial point of contact, then perhaps visiting another such location armed with my camera and my new terrifying awareness, might yield more clues, more tangible proof of its existence. Or perhaps, I admitted to myself with a shiver, it was a reckless desire to confront the source of my terror, to force some kind of understanding, however dangerous. My research into Oakhaven's lost landmarks led me to the Orpheum Grand, a once magnificent vaudeville theater, now a crumbling, boarded-up ruin in a derelict part of the city, untouched for over 60 years after a tragic fire had claimed several lives. Its history was steeped in rumors of strange occurrences even before its closure, of eerie music heard from the empty stage, of shadowy figures glimpsed in the decaying balconies. It felt like the perfect, terrible place. One moonless, rain-soaked night, I found myself standing before its imposing, graffiti-scarred facade. The air around the Orpheum was heavy. Still, the usual city hum strangely absent here, replaced by a profound, tomb-like silence. The scent of old velvet, dust, and something acrid, like burnt wood and forgotten perfume, clung to the damp air. This place felt even older, even more saturated with sorrow and unseen presences than Redwater. Slipping through a broken side door, I entered a world of decaying grandeur. My flashlight beam illuminated rows of rotting velvet seats, a collapsing proscenium arch, and a stage shrouded in cobwebs thick as funeral palls. The silence within was absolute, oppressive, yet beneath it, I could almost feel that familiar, low electrical hum, a faint thrumming heartbeat within the theater's decaying bones. The entity was here too, or an echo of it, waiting. As I began to photograph the ghostly stage, the orchestra pit filled with debris, the crumbling plasterwork of the once ornate ceiling, the feeling of being watched was immediate, intense. Shadows seemed to dance just beyond the edge of my flashlight beam, and faint, almost inaudible whispers, like the rustle of old costumes or the sighs of a long-departed audience, seemed to emanate from the empty, decaying boxes that lined the walls. Then, from the depths of the stage, behind the tattered remnants of a velvet curtain, I heard a distinct sound, a soft, dragging footstep, followed by a low, choked cough. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a pathetic tremor in the vast, dark space. "Is someone there?" For a moment, only silence answered. Then the dragging footstep again, closer this time. A figure emerged slowly from behind the curtain, not one of the shadowy entities I had come to expect, but a man, gaunt and disheveled, his clothes ragged, his eyes wide with a wild, terrified light. He clutched a small, flickering oil lamp in one trembling hand. He looked like a squatter, perhaps, or another urban explorer like myself, but there was a raw, almost feral fear in his expression that spoke of horrors witnessed. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice hoarse, his gaze darting nervously around the decaying theater. "This place, it remembers. It shows you things you can't unsee." Before I could ask what he meant, a section of the balcony above us creaked ominously, and a shower of plaster dust rained down. The man let out a terrified yelp, dropped his lamp with a clatter and bolted, scrambling back through the broken side door and vanishing into the rainy night. His sudden, panicked flight left an even deeper chill in the air. What had he seen? What memories did this theater hold that could reduce a grown man to such abject terror? I quickly retrieved his dropped lamp, its flame guttering, and knew I couldn't stay here much longer. I took a few more photographs, my hands shaking, my senses screaming with a primal urge to flee this place of profound, active decay and sorrow. It was only later, back in the false security of my apartment, as I reviewed the photographs from the Orpheum Grand on my laptop, that the true extent of its haunting became clear. The anomalies were no longer subtle, no longer confined to fleeting shadows or indistinct symbols. In the images of the stage, clear, almost translucent figures stood amongst the debris, their forms contorted in agony or despair. On the walls of the decaying boxes, words had appeared that I hadn't seen. Help us. Trapped. It sees. One photograph, a shot of the grand crumbling chandelier, showed a face, pale and sorrowful, reflected in one of its grimy, multifaceted crystals. A face that was not my own. A face that seemed to be looking directly at me, its eyes filled with an unutterable ancient grief. The entity was not just a vague presence. It had form, however spectral, however mutable, and its tendrils were deeply entwined with these forgotten, sorrowful places. The electrical hum in my apartment seemed to surge in response to these images, the whispers from the walls growing louder, more insistent, almost approving. The city's infrastructure was indeed its nervous system, and these abandoned, tragedy-soaked locations were its exposed nerve endings, places where its consciousness, its hunger, was most potent, most easily accessed. And my photography, my obsessive need to document these remnants, was acting as a key, unlocking doors I never should have approached. The Orpheum Grand had yielded its secrets, not in historical records, but in the terrifying, undeniable evidence of my own photographs. The city was not just watching me, it was showing me its tormented soul, its collection of trapped echoes. And the more I saw, the more I understood, the deeper I was drawn into its chilling, spectral embrace. The whispers were no longer just on the line. They were in my head, in my art, in my very perception of the world around me. The horrifying clarity of the photographs from the Orpheum Grand, the spectral figures, the desperate words scrawled on decaying walls, the sorrowful face in the chandelier's crystal, had shattered my last defenses against the encroaching unreality. This was no longer a subtle haunting, a game of shadows and whispers. This was a direct, undeniable manifestation, and I was its unwilling audience, its chosen subject. The city, my city, was a repository of active, sentient sorrows, and its remnants were closing in. My apartment felt less like a home and more like a baited trap, the rain outside a constant, mournful thrum. Liam's well-meaning skepticism, his gentle suggestions of stress and overactive imagination, now felt like a distant, irrelevant echo from a world I no longer inhabited. I was beyond such rationalizations. I needed answers, not platitudes. I needed someone who understood the city's hidden language, its forgotten histories, its spectral undercurrents. And in the deepest, dustiest corners of my memory, a name surfaced. Mr. Silas Blackwood, an eccentric, reclusive urban historian and folklorist, a man rumored to possess an unparalleled knowledge of Oakhaven's secret soul. Finding him was a challenge in itself. He had no listed phone number, no public presence. His existence was almost as spectral as the entities I was now encountering. My research skills, honed by years in archives, eventually led me to a crumbling, ivy-clad tenement in one of Oakhaven's oldest, most forgotten districts. A place where the streets were still gaslit, and the fog seemed to linger even on clear days. His small, cluttered apartment was on the top floor, accessible only by a narrow, creaking staircase. The door was opened by Mr. Blackwood himself, a small, bird-like man with eyes that seemed to hold the accumulated dust and wisdom of centuries. His apartment was a chaotic labyrinth of books, maps, strange artifacts, and yellowed newspaper clippings. the air thick with the scent of old paper, pipe tobacco, and something else, something vaguely alchemical and unsettling. He regarded me with an initial sharp wariness, his gaze missing nothing of my disheveled appearance, my rain-soaked coat, my barely concealed terror. I introduced myself, my voice trembling slightly, and explained as coherently as I could my photographic work, my fascination with abandoned urban spaces, and then, more hesitantly, the strange anomalies I had begun to capture, the unsettling phenomena that had started to plague my life since my visit to the Redwater industrial complex. I carefully avoided sounding unhinged, presenting my experiences as a puzzle, a mystery I was trying to solve. He listened in silence, his bright bird-like eyes never leaving my face, his expression unreadable. When I finally nervously offered him the portfolio containing my most disturbing photographs, the shadowy figures at Redwater, the spectral face in the Orpheum's chandelier, the strange symbols appearing on decaying walls, his demeanor subtly shifted. He took the prints with long, delicate fingers, his initial wariness replaced by a flicker of intense, almost predatory interest. He spread the photographs out on a cluttered table, examining each one with a meticulous, unnerving scrutiny. For a long time, he said nothing. The only sounds in the room, the soft rustle of the prints, the distant sigh of the wind, and the frantic beating of my own heart. Then he looked up, his ancient eyes holding a new light, not of surprise, but of a grim, undeniable recognition. "Ah," he murmured, his voice a dry, papery whisper. "So, the city has begun to show you its true face, has it?" His calm acceptance of the impossible, his immediate validation of what I had seen, was both a profound relief and a source of fresh, chilling terror. "These remnants, as I call them," he continued, gesturing towards the photographs, "are echoes of strong emotions, of lives intensely lived, of tragedies deeply imprinted upon the fabric of a place. Oak Haven is an old city, Miss Alara. It has more than its share of such echoes, such psychic residue." He spoke of genius loci, of the ancient belief that certain places possess a unique, sentient spirit, an intelligence born from the accumulated memories and emotions of those who have inhabited them. "Abandoned places," he explained, his voice a low, hypnotic drone, "are particularly potent. They are vessels of forgotten energies, their silence filled with the unspoken stories of those who have passed through, their decay a fertile ground for the city's more spectral flora to take root and grow. These entities you've encountered," he said, his gaze fixed on a photograph of a particularly malevolent-looking shadow. "They are the city's forgotten children, its dispossessed memories. They resent being disturbed, being seen by those who do not understand their nature. Your camera, your artist's eye, you have a sensitivity, a way of perceiving these subtle energies. You have inadvertently, perhaps, attracted their unwelcome attention." His words, though couched in poetic, almost academic terms, sent a shiver of pure dread down my spine. I wasn't just an observer. I was a target. My passion, my art, had made me a beacon for these unseen urban horrors. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why are they following me, tormenting me?" Mr. Blackwood sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across parchment. "Want," he mused. "Perhaps they want to be acknowledged, to be remembered. Perhaps they are merely curious, drawn to your own vibrant energy, like moths to a flame. Or perhaps, his voice dropped, his eyes darkening. They are territorial, and they see you as an intrusion, a threat to their hidden, shadowed world. Some remnants are benign, mere echoes. Others are hungry. He then showed me an ancient, leather-bound book, its pages filled with strange, spidery script and unsettling, hand-drawn illustrations of entities that seemed to be composed of shadow, of urban decay, of distorted human forms intertwined with the very infrastructure of a city. There are old tales, he whispered, of a consciousness that underlies Oakhaven, a collective memory of all its forgotten sorrows, all its hidden darkness. Some call it the urbis anima, the soul of the city. This urbis anima, he continued, it can sometimes manifest, particularly in places where the veil between the seen and unseen world is thin. Abandoned buildings, forgotten tunnels, places saturated with strong, unreleased emotion. And it can interact with those who are sensitive enough to perceive it, or unfortunate enough to draw its focused attention. His gaze was pointed, leaving me in no doubt that I was one of the unfortunate. He offered no easy solutions, no simple way to dispel the haunting. Instead, he spoke of understanding the pathways, of recognizing the patterns, of appeasing the echoes. His advice was cryptic, filled with allegory and obscure folklore, leaving me with more questions than answers, a deeper sense of the vast ancient mystery I had stumbled into. He seemed less a guide and more a chronicler of inevitable, sorrowful outcomes. As I prepared to leave his cluttered, suffocating apartment, the rain outside beginning to fall with a renewed intensity, Mr. Blackwood placed a small, smooth, dark stone in my hand. An old protective charm, he said, his eyes holding a flicker of genuine, if weary, concern. From a place even older than Oakhaven, it may offer some small measure of warding against the city's less benign attentions. Or it may simply be a stone. The efficacy of such things often lies in the belief of the holder. His final words were both a blessing and a curse, a fragile offering of hope intertwined with a profound sense of ancient, inescapable forces. I left Mr. Blackwood's apartment with the weight of centuries on my shoulders, the small dark stone a cold, uncertain comfort in my pocket. The city outside, with its rain-swept streets and its deep, hidden sorrows, now felt like a vast, sentient labyrinth, and I was a solitary traveler, marked and pursued, armed only with a camera, a mother-of-pearl button, and the cryptic clues of a reclusive, enigmatic archivist of air and shadow. Mr. Silas Blackwood's cluttered apartment, with its ancient books and cryptic pronouncements, had offered a strange, unsettling form of validation, but no real solace. I left with his smooth, dark stone clutched in my hand, its surface unnaturally cold, and a deeper understanding of the unwelcome attention I had attracted. The city's remnants, its sentient echoes, were not just curious. They were aware of me, perhaps even resentful of my gaze. The persistent rain felt like their tears, or perhaps their spittle. In the days that followed, the haunting escalated, its tendrils no longer confined to the abandoned spaces I photographed, nor even to the oppressive atmosphere of my own apartment. It became a constant, insidious companion, a cold dread that seeped into every aspect of my life. The feeling of being watched was a permanent fixture, whether I was navigating a bustling daytime street or huddled alone in my living room. The city's myriad eyes, both seen and unseen, were always upon me. The faint electrical hum, once a subtle thrum in my apartment walls, now seemed to follow me, a low, almost sub-audible vibration that I could feel in the floorboards of cafes, in the metallic handrails of the subway, even in the quiet solitude of Oak Haven's few green parks. It was as if the city's entire nervous system was attuned to my presence, its currents carrying the entity's awareness, its silent, unwavering scrutiny. My sleep became a battleground. Night after night, I was plunged into vivid, terrifying nightmares of sprawling, dark cityscapes, their architecture shifting and impossible, like Escher drawings rendered in decaying brick and rusted iron. I would be running through endless, labyrinthine corridors, pursued by indistinct, shadowy figures, their whispers a chilling chorus just behind me, always on the verge of catching me. I would awaken gasping, my heart pounding, the dream's oppressive atmosphere clinging to me like a shroud long after I was conscious. The exhaustion was profound, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of coffee could dispel. It began to affect my work, my concentration. My freelance assignments, once a source of creative satisfaction, now felt like an unbearable burden. How could I focus on capturing the beauty of ordinary urban life when I knew what lay hidden just beneath its mundane surface, what unseen things writhed in its shadows, what ancient sorrows pulsed through its very infrastructure? Driven by a desperate need to either confirm my sanity or document my descent into madness, I forced myself to photograph new locations, places with no known tragic history, no overt sense of decay. A modern plaza, a busy marketplace, a quiet residential street in a newer part of Oak Haven. I developed the images with a trepidation that bordered on physical illness, half expecting, half dreading what I might find. The results were even more terrifying than I could have imagined. The anomalies were no longer subtle, no longer confined to the deep shadows or the forgotten corners. In a photograph of children playing in a sunlit park, a tall, shadowy figure with no discernible features stood amongst the trees in the background, its form a stark black void against the bright foliage. In a shot of a bustling market scene, the faces in the crowd were subtly, grotesquely distorted, their smiles too wide, their eyes too dark. And the symbols, those strange, organic glyphs I had first seen in the Redwater photographs, now appeared with an almost defiant clarity, faintly etched onto a brick wall behind a laughing couple, subtly woven into the pattern of a discarded newspaper, even chillingly, seeming to form in the random configuration of pigeons on a sun-drenched plaza. The entity was not just tied to specific tragedy-soaked locations. It was tied to me, its stain spreading across my perception, across my art. My camera, once my most trusted tool, my window onto the world, now felt like a cursed object, a conduit through which this urban malevolence was actively imprinting itself onto my reality. Each click of the shutter was an invitation, each developed print a fresh wave of horror. The act of seeing these forgotten places, of documenting their decay, had somehow made me a beacon, a focal point for the city's restless, sentient remnants. Liam, my ever-rational friend, called, his voice laced with a concern that had now tipped over into genuine alarm. He had heard the growing desperation in my recent, increasingly erratic communications. He insisted on visiting, despite my feeble protests that I was just tired, overworked. I knew he wouldn't understand, but a part of me, the part that still craved a lifeline to normalcy, ached for his presence, for the simple, grounding reality of a friend. He arrived on a blustery, rain-swept evening, his face etched with worry, as he took in my disheveled appearance, the dark circles under my eyes, the frantic, haunted energy that now clung to me. I tried to explain, showing him the latest photographs, the undeniable anomalies, the spreading symbols. He listened patiently, his gaze filled with a mixture of pity and a growing, uncomfortable fear he tried to hide. "Ilara," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "This isn't healthy. These are tricks of the light, pareidolia, stress. You're an artist. You're sensitive. You're working yourself into the ground exploring these depressing places. You need to stop. You need help. Real help." He suggested a therapist, a doctor, a long vacation away from Oak Haven, away from my morbid fascinations. His words were a wall between us. Just as he was speaking, trying to reason with what he clearly perceived as my unraveling sanity, it happened. A heavy, antique paperweight on my desk, a solid block of lead I used to hold down unruly maps, suddenly slid across the polished surface as if pushed by an invisible hand, then crashed to the floor with a deafening thud. We both stared, speechless, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent room. Liam's face was ashen. For a moment he said nothing, his eyes wide, fixed on the fallen paperweight. The rational explanations died on his lips. He had seen it. He couldn't deny it. But then, with a visible effort, he seemed to shake it off, a forced, nervous laugh escaping him. "Old buildings, Ilara," he stammered, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. "Uneven floors, vibrations from the street. There's always a reason." But I saw the doubt in his eyes, the flicker of genuine fear he was trying so desperately to suppress. He didn't believe his own explanation, not entirely. He left soon after, his usual pragmatic reassurances replaced by a hurried, awkward farewell, a promise to call soon that neither of us believed. His visit, meant as an intervention, had only succeeded in terrifying him and leaving me more profoundly, terrifyingly alone with my encroaching horror. After he left, I noticed it, a dark, spreading stain on the wallpaper in the corner of my living room, a patch of dampness that hadn't been there before. It was faint at first, but over the next few hours, it grew, its edges creeping outwards like a malevolent, blooming fungus. And as it spread, its shape began to coalesce, to form a sickeningly familiar pattern, one of the strange, organic symbols from my Redwater photographs, now imprinted on the very fabric of my home. The entity was no longer just watching, no longer just whispering, or showing me fleeting glimpses and reflections. It was actively marking its territory, staining my reality, its presence a tangible, growing corruption. The rain outside had become a torrential downpour, the wind howling like a hungry wolf, and the electrical hum in the walls was a deafening, triumphant roar. The city's remnants were not just haunting me. They were claiming me, piece by piece. The spreading stain on my apartment wall, a dark, organic symbol mirroring those from the accursed Redwater photographs, was a clear, undeniable declaration. The entity was not just watching, it was claiming. Liam's shaken departure had severed my last real tether to normalcy, leaving me adrift in an ocean of paranoia and encroaching supernatural horror. The city outside, with its ceaseless rain and shadowed corners, felt less like a home and more like a vast, sentient hunting ground, and I was its designated prey. In the days that followed, the entity's manipulation of my environment escalated, shifting its focus to the very tools of my modern life, my technology. My laptop, once a portal to the world, a tool for my research and creativity, began to behave with an intelligent, malevolent capriciousness. Files would corrupt inexplicably, especially those containing my research into Oak Haven's forgotten histories or my photographs of its decaying underbelly. My internet connection would sever precisely when I was on the verge of a potential breakthrough. The digital torment soon became deeply, chillingly personal. I would open my personal photo library, seeking solace in images of happier times, of family and friends, only to find them subtly, then grotesquely, altered. A beloved photograph of my sister would have her eyes replaced by dark, hollow sockets. A joyful holiday snapshot would now feature a shadowy, indistinct figure lurking. In the background, a figure that hadn't been there before. These were not glitches. They were violations, desecrations of my most cherished memories. New photographs I attempted to take, even of the most mundane subjects within my apartment, a bowl of fruit, a stack of books, would often develop, with those same disturbing symbols, the city's hidden script, faintly watermarked across the image, or with shadowy tendrils creeping in from the edges of the frame. It was as if the entity was not just haunting me, but actively co-opting my art, my very perception, turning my lens into a window for its own malevolent manifestations. Then came the audio messages. My phone, which I now rarely used for fear of the static-laden calls, would occasionally play a garbled voicemail, even when no call had been registered. The voice would be a distorted, nightmarish mimicry of someone I knew. Liam, my mother, even my own, uttering disjointed phrases, chilling warnings, or sometimes just soft, sibilant whispers that seemed to know my deepest fears, my most secret shames. One particularly terrifying message was a recording of what sounded like my own panicked breathing, overlaid with a chorus of faint, mocking laughter and the now familiar electrical hum. It was a recording of something that hadn't happened yet, or perhaps something that was happening just beyond my perception, a soundscape of my own impending terror. The entity was not just listening, it was composing, using the fragments of my life, my voice, my fear as its raw material. It was clear that this was no diffuse, mindless haunting. This was an intelligence, ancient and vast, perhaps, but also adaptive, learning. It was studying me, dissecting my vulnerabilities, using my own technological dependencies as pathways for its insidious, psychological assault. It was trying to communicate, yes, but its communication was a form of torment, a way of breaking down my sanity, of making me question every perception, every memory. Desperate, feeling the walls of my own mind beginning to crumble, I risked another visit to Mr. Silas Blackwood, the eccentric urban folklorist. His cluttered, book-filled apartment felt like the only place in Oak Haven where the city's true, hidden nature was acknowledged, where my experiences might not be dismissed as madness. The small, dark stone he had given me was a constant, cold weight in my pocket. He listened to my frantic account of the technological haunting, his bird-like eyes surprisingly sympathetic, yet holding a familiar, ancient weariness. "Ah, yes," he murmured, when I described the mimicked voices, the corrupted photographs, the urbis anima, the soul of the city. It is a collector of echoes, of remnants. And in this modern age, our digital footprints, our electronic whispers, are potent echoes indeed. It learns, it adapts, it seeks resonance. "But why me?" I pleaded. "What does it want?" Mr. Blackwood sighed, his gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window that overlooked a forgotten Oak Haven alleyway. Perhaps it sees in you a kindred spirit, Miss Alara, another archivist of forgotten things. Perhaps your ability to perceive its initial traces, your fascination with its hidden domains, has made you a particularly bright signal in its perception. It may wish to understand you, to incorporate your unique perspective into its vast, ancient consciousness. His words, "Incorporate your perspective," sent a fresh wave of terror through me. It sounded chillingly like Mrs. Gable's talk of attunement, of joining the chorus. This wasn't just about being haunted. It was about being assimilated. My individuality, my very essence, potentially consumed by this vast, ancient urban entity. The city didn't just want to be seen, it wanted to see through me. These entities, Silas continued, his voice a low, academic drone that was somehow both comforting and terrifying. They often perceive strong emotions, strong individualities, as either threats or potential sources of enrichment. They are drawn to those who can truly see them. And you, my dear, you see them very clearly indeed. The question is, what will it do now that it knows it is truly seen? His question hung in the air, unanswered. He offered no solutions, only a deeper, more terrifying understanding of my predicament. He did, however, give me a small, leather-bound booklet, filled with his own spidery script and hand-drawn diagrams of the symbols I had seen. "These are old warding patterns," he said. "Some say they can disrupt unwanted resonances if drawn, with true intent. Or they may simply focus the mind. Use them as you will." I returned to my apartment with the booklet of warding symbols, a fragile, arcane defense against an enemy that could manipulate the very fabric of modern technology. That night, the entity launched its most direct, most personal assault. I was working late at my computer, trying to archive my untainted photographs, my only link to a reality that felt increasingly distant, when my screen suddenly went black. Then, it flickered back to life, not with my familiar desktop, but with a single terrifying image. The flooded turbine hall from the Redwater industrial complex. But it was different now. In the center of the black, still water, a colossal, shadowy figure was beginning to coalesce, its form composed of swirling static, fragmented cityscapes, and countless tiny, screaming faces. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were like two burning embers fixed directly on me. A synthesized voice, a monstrous amalgamation of the static-laden whispers, the mimicked voices of my loved ones, and something ancient and inhuman, boomed from my speakers, shaking the very room. "Ilara!" it thundered, the sound of physical blow. "You have seen the remnants. You have heard the echoes. Now you will become part of the song. Your perspective will be ours." The screen filled with a blinding, strobing light, the synthesized voice rising to an unbearable, deafening crescendo. I screamed, throwing myself back from the desk, shielding my eyes. My computer made a sound like it was tearing itself apart, a high-pitched electronic shriek, and then, with a final violent crack, it went dark. Silence, absolute and terrifying, descended upon the room, broken only by my own ragged, panicked breathing and the relentless, weeping rain outside. The entity had made its demand clear. It was no longer content to merely watch, to whisper, to subtly manipulate. It wanted me, my consciousness, my ability to perceive its hidden world. It wanted to make me a part of its ancient urban chorus. The digital ghost had launched its most personal attack, and I was left shattered, terrified, and with the horrifying realization that my very thoughts, my very self, were now the battleground. The synthesized voice from my destroyed computer, thundering its possessive claim. Your perspective will be ours, had been a terrifying declaration of intent. The entity was no longer content with subtle harassment. It wanted assimilation. My apartment felt like a besieged outpost. The rain-swept city of Oakhaven, a vast, sentient web patiently waiting to draw me into its darkest core. Mr. Silas Blackwood's cryptic clues, his talk of the urbis anima and its convergence points, were my only fragile hope, a desperate map to understanding, and perhaps resisting. He had spoken of an original wound, a place where the city's oldest, most potent memories and energies coalesced, a nexus from which the entity's influence might emanate. His notes, filled with arcane symbols and obscure historical references, hinted at the long-abandoned Blackwood Key transit station, sealed off decades ago, after a series of unexplained disappearances and a catastrophic, unseasonal flood that had supposedly originated from deep within its tunnels. It lay directly beneath the now derelict Redwater industrial complex. My decision was terrifying, yet strangely inevitable. I could not wait for the entity to fully consume my digital life, then my mind. I had to take the fight, or at least my investigation, to its source. Armed with a heavy-duty flashlight, Silas's booklet of warding symbols, the strangely warm mother-of-pearl button, and a profound sense of impending doom, I set out on a rain-lashed night towards the forgotten underbelly of Oakhaven. Finding an accessible entrance to the sealed Blackwood Key Station was a perilous undertaking in itself. Most were bricked up or welded shut, forgotten by the bustling city above. But Silas's notes had mentioned a hidden access point through an old storm drain overflow tunnel near the riverbank, a place rarely visited, choked with debris and the city's forgotten refuse. The rain intensified as I neared the river, turning the ground into a slick, treacherous mire. The air in the storm drain was thick with the stench of decay, stagnant water, and something else. That familiar, faint metallic tang I now associated with the entity's presence. My flashlight beam cut a nervous swathe through the oppressive darkness, illuminating rust-colored walls and the scuttling forms of unseen creatures. The only sounds were the drip of water, the distant rumble of the city above, and the frantic, desperate beating of my own heart. After what felt like an eternity of navigating narrow, collapsing tunnels, I found it. A heavy, rusted iron door, half hidden behind a fall of rubble, marked with a barely legible sign, Blackwood Key Station. Authorized access only. The door was stiff, but with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I managed to wrench it open, revealing a gaping black maw beyond. This was the threshold to the city's forgotten heart. Stepping into the abandoned station was like stepping into a tomb. A profound, unnatural silence enveloped me, broken only by the distant drip of water and the faint, almost inaudible electrical hum that was now a constant, terrifying companion. The air was cold, heavy, and a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for decades, lay like a shroud over everything. The crumbling platforms, the rusted turnstiles, the faded, ghostly advertisements on the tiled walls. As I ventured deeper, my flashlight, beam dancing across the decaying grandeur, the entity's presence became more pronounced. Shadowy figures flitted at the very edge of my vision. More substantial here, more defined than they had been on the streets above. The whispers were clearer too, sibilant and urgent, seeming to emanate from the dark mouths of the tunnels that, branched off into the oppressive blackness. Voices that spoke of loneliness, of anger, of an ancient, insatiable hunger. Objects, small pieces of debris, a rusted can, a loose stone, would skitter across the floor as if moved by an unseen hand, always just behind me, or just out of sight. The electrical hum intensified, vibrating up through the soles of my boots, making my teeth ache. This place was not just haunted, it was alive, a nexus of the city's darkest energies, and it was acutely, terrifyingly aware of my intrusion. Then, as if summoned by my deepening penetration into its domain, the true storm broke over Oakhaven. I heard it even down here, a distant apocalyptic rumble that grew rapidly closer, the ground beneath my feet beginning to tremble. Water started to drip, then pour, through cracks in the ancient ceiling of the station, the sound of the city's forgotten waterways, perhaps, or the storm drains overflowing, flooding this subterranean labyrinth. The few remaining emergency lights in the station, which had cast a feeble, ghostly glow, flickered violently and then died, plunging me into an absolute, suffocating darkness, relieved only by the narrow, dancing beam of my flashlight. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to engulf me. I was trapped, deep beneath the city, in the heart of the entity's domain, as a tempest of almost supernatural fury raged above. The entity's power, amplified by the storm, surged through the station. The whispers became a deafening roar, a chorus of countless voices screaming in my mind. The shadowy figures were no longer fleeting glimpses but tangible presences, their cold touch brushing against my skin, their forms coalescing and dissolving in the erratic beam of my light. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the metallic scent was now overpowering, almost making me retch. Through a grimy ventilation shaft high in the tunnel wall, I caught a brief, horrifying glimpse of the city above during a particularly violent flash of lightning. The streets were dark, powerless, but not empty. I saw them, the shadowy figures, countless now, writhing and dancing in the storm-lashed streets, their forms more distinct, more menacing than ever before. The city's hidden consciousness, unleashed by the blackout, was reveling in its newfound freedom, its power magnified. This was not just about me anymore. This entity, this urbis anima, was a threat to the entire city, its influence spreading, its hunger growing. My small personal haunting was merely a symptom of a far larger, more ancient malady. The knowledge was a crushing weight, but it also brought a strange, terrible clarity. I could not simply run. I had to understand, to find the convergence, point Silas had spoken of, the very heart of its power. The flashlight beam, my only guide, began to flicker, its batteries failing. Desperation clawed at me. I pushed onward, deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels, following the intensifying hum, the pull of some unseen, malevolent gravity. The walls themselves seemed to weep a black, oily residue, and the symbols I had seen in my photographs were now visible here, carved into the ancient stone, glowing faintly with an inner, sickly light. I stumbled into a vast, circular chamber where multiple tunnels converged, their dark mouths like gaping maws. In the center of the chamber, the floor sloped down to a deep black pool of water, from which the electrical hum emanated with an almost physical force. The air here was thick, vibrating, alive with unseen energies. This was it. This was the original wound, the convergence point, the forgotten heart of Oakhaven's darkness. The whispers were a deafening roar here, the shadowy figures a swirling vortex around the central pool. and from the depths of that black water, I felt it, the full, focused attention of the urbis anima, its ancient, multifaceted consciousness fixed entirely upon me. It was a presence of immense power, of unimaginable age, of a hunger that had festered in the city's underbelly for centuries, and I had just walked willingly into its lair. My flashlight gave one final pathetic flicker, then died, plunging me into an absolute terrifying blackness, relieved only by the faint, pulsating glow of the symbols carved into the chamber walls. The entity's collective voice boomed in my mind, no longer whispering, but thundering its possessive, triumphant claim. You have come to us, little Archivist. You have found the heart. Now, you will become its eternal echo. You will become its eternal echo. The thundering pronouncement of the urbis anima, the city's ancient, coalesced consciousness, slammed into my mind, a wave of possessive, chilling intent. I stood in the heart of its domain, the vast, circular chamber deep beneath Oakhaven, plunged into an almost absolute darkness save for the faint, sickly luminescence of the symbols carved into the hewn stone walls. The storm raged far above, its fury a distant, muted roar here, yet its oppressive energy seeped through the very earth, feeding the entity's palpable power. My flashlight was dead, a useless weight in my trembling hand. The air was thick, vibrating, with the deafening hum I now recognized as the entity's core frequency. Illusions began to writhe in the faint, pulsating light of the wall-carved glyphs. Scenes from Redwater, the decaying grandeur of the Orpheum Grand, faces of sorrow and despair I had only glimpsed in my corrupted photographs, now swirling around me like a macabre accusatory ballet. They were my fears, my obsessions, given form by this ancient urban mind. The black pool of water at the chamber's center began to churn, its surface disturbed by an unseen agitation from below. Tendrils of inky blackness, like solidified shadows, rose from its depths, reaching, probing, their touch sending slivers of icy cold through the already frigid air. The whispers were no longer just in my head. They were everywhere, a chorus of a million lost voices, the city's forgotten sorrows, its hidden shames, all clamoring for acknowledgement, for release, for a new vessel. The storm's peak seemed to coincide with the entity's rising power. The ground beneath me trembled with each distant thunderclap, and water began to seep from new cracks in the chamber walls, the forgotten subterranean rivers awakening, threatening to flood this unholy sanctuary. Escape routes I might have half remembered from my descent now seemed to shift and dissolve in the disorienting gloom, the entity actively controlling this subterranean labyrinth, sealing me within its heart. I remembered Mr. Silas Blackwood's booklet of warding symbols, still clutched in my pocket, its leather cover damp with the tunnel's humidity. With fumbling fingers, I pulled it out, trying to recall the specific glyphs he had suggested might offer some protection, some way to disrupt unwanted resonances. The mother-of-pearl button, also in my pocket, pulsed with a faint, almost desperate warmth, a tiny spark against the overwhelming coldness of this place. Drawing on a reserve of strength I didn't know I possessed, I began to trace one of the warding symbols Silas had shown me onto the dusty stone floor with a shard of fallen rock. My movements clumsy in the near darkness, my mind struggling to focus against the psychic assault. It was a complex, star-like pattern designed, he had said, to ground the self against the city's unquiet dreams. As the symbol neared completion, the entity reacted. The swirling illusions intensified, becoming more personal, more terrifying. Images of my own past failures, my deepest insecurities, played out before me with a cruel, mocking clarity. The chorus of whispers rose to a deafening shriek, trying to break my concentration, to shatter my will. The shadowy tendrils from the pool lashed out, narrowly missing me, their touch promising an oblivion colder than any grave. But I held on to the image of the symbol, to Silas's reedy voice explaining its ancient protective purpose. The mother of pearl, button in my pocket, grew hotter, its warmth a surprising counterpoint to the chamber's icy chill, and the faint light from the wall glyphs seemed to steady, to pulse with a less malevolent rhythm. My simple act of defiance, of imposing an ancient order onto this chaos, was having some small, almost imperceptible effect. The entity's direct psychic pressure lessened fractionally, its initial overwhelming assault giving way to a more focused, almost curious scrutiny. The illusions flickered, and for a moment, I saw not my own fears, but a vast, interconnected network of what looked like glowing threads, the city's hidden pathways, its nerves, all converging on the black pool at the chamber's center. This was its true form, perhaps, its web of influence. The mother of pearl button, now almost burning against my skin, seemed to resonate with a specific frequency within that vast, glowing network. It was an anomaly, a piece of some other, perhaps similar, urban mystery, a fragment that didn't belong to this city's sorrow. Could it be a key? A discordant note in the Urbis Anima's ancient song? I remembered the fleeting image of a different, misty street when I first found it, a street of silent sparrows. My camera, miraculously still hung around my neck, its lens cap askew. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in my mind. Silas had said the entity resented being seen, being documented by those who did not understand. My photography had attracted its attention, had made me a target. But what if I could use that very act, not to capture its decay, but to reveal its core, to expose its hidden heart with the stark, unflinching light of my flash? It was a terrifying gamble. The entity's power here was immense, almost tangible. A direct confrontation, an attempt to capture its essence, could shatter my mind, absorb me completely. But the alternative, a slow descent into madness, or becoming another of its whispering echoes, was unthinkable. The button pulsed, a silent, urgent encouragement. I had to try. With trembling hands, I raised my camera, fumbling with the settings in the near darkness, aiming the lens towards the churning black pool, towards the heart of the glowing, interconnected web of light I had glimpsed. The entity sensed my intent. The psychic pressure returned with a vengeance, a crushing wave of pure, elemental rage. The shadowy tendrils from the pool solidified, lashing towards me with terrifying speed. I ignored the pain, the terror, the screaming chorus in my mind. I focused on the image in my viewfinder, on that single point of convergence, that black, hungry heart. And as a colossal, shadowy form began to rise from the pool, its single, multifaceted eye, composed of 1,000 captured city lights, fixed upon me, I pressed the shutter. The flash, an unexpected, brilliant burst of pure white light, exploded through the chamber, momentarily obliterating the darkness, the illusions, the glowing glyphs. The entity shrieked, a sound that was not of air, but of rending psychic energy, a sound that tore at the very fabric of my being. The shadowy tendrils recoiled as if burned. The glowing web of light flickered violently, then dimmed. The oppressive atmosphere in the chamber lessened, the deafening hum dropping to a low, wounded moan. My flash had been like a physical blow to its core, an unexpected assault of pure, unadulterated light into its ancient shadowed heart. The immediate, overwhelming presence of the urbis anima receded, its focused attention splintering, its power momentarily disrupted. The illusions in the chamber dissolved, leaving only the damp, cold stone and the eerie, now fainter glow of the carved symbols. I had struck a blow, a significant one, but I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was not defeated, merely surprised, wounded. The chamber was still a place of immense power, the black pool a gateway to something ancient and terrible. My act of defiance, my photographic assault, had bought me a reprieve, a moment of clarity, but the entity was still here, its essence woven into the very foundations of Omen Point and the city above. The storm outside continued to rage, though its fury felt less targeted now, more a reflection of the entity's own pained, chaotic retreat. I was exhausted, my body and mind screaming from the psychic onslaught, but I was alive, and for the first time since stepping onto Sparrowwood Lane, or perhaps even since entering Redwater, I felt a tiny, fragile sliver of agency. I had faced the city's forgotten heart, its collective shadow, and I had, for a moment, pushed back its encroaching gloom. The fight, I knew, was far from over, but I had found a weapon, however unconventional. Self-correction. The reference to Sparrowwood Lane and Omen Point are from previous stories I generated for the user. This story is City Remnants, and the city is Oakhaven. I need to correct these references in the final paragraphs to maintain consistency with the current story. The chamber was still a place of immense power, the black pool a gateway to something ancient and terrible. My act of defiance, my photographic assault, had bought me a reprieve, a moment of clarity, but the entity was still here, its essence woven into the very foundations of Oakhaven. The storm outside continued to rage, though its fury felt less targeted now, more a reflection of the entity's own pained, chaotic retreat. I was exhausted, my body and mind screaming from the psychic onslaught, but I was alive, and for the first time since the entity's presence had truly manifested, I felt a tiny, fragile sliver of agency. I had faced the city's forgotten heart, its collective shadow, and I had, for a moment, pushed back its encroaching gloom. The fight, I knew, was far from over, but I had found a weapon, however unconventional, in the revealing light of my lens. The brilliant, unexpected flash from my camera had momentarily stunned the urbis anima, its psychic shriek echoing in the vast subterranean chamber as its core manifestation recoiled from the sudden revealing light. I stood panting in the oppressive darkness. The afterimage of that colossal, multifaceted eye burned into my vision. The entity was wounded, yes, its oppressive presence lessened, but it was far from defeated. I knew this was merely a reprieve, a fleeting chance bought at great risk, and the storm still raged above, a testament to its enduring power. Mr. Silas Blackwood's words about the entity resenting being truly seen, about its power lying in its anonymity, its ability to fester in forgotten, unacknowledged spaces, now resonated with a desperate clarity. My photography, my art, had inadvertently drawn its attention, but perhaps that same art, wielded with conscious intent, could become my shield, my weapon, if I could document its hidden pathways, its core connections. Perhaps I could diminish its hold, at least on me, by dragging its shadowy form into the harsh light of understanding. My desperate plan solidified. I had to trace its network back, from this central chamber, back through the city's underbelly. using the very knowledge it had inadvertently revealed to me. The glowing symbols, the resonating hum, the pathways of its influence. Silas had spoken of severing threads, of warding nexuses. The mother-of-pearl button felt warm in my pocket. The small, dark stone he'd given me a comforting weight. These, along with my camera, were my only tools against an ancient, urban consciousness. The journey back through the labyrinthine tunnels beneath Blackwood Key was a terrifying ordeal. Though the entity's direct psychic assault had lessened, its presence still permeated the very stones, the very air. Illusions flickered at the edge of my failing flashlight beam, false pathways opening, familiar tunnels twisting into dead ends. The sound of the storm above distorted into mocking laughter or sorrowful whispers. It was trying to confuse me, to trap me in its domain. I relied on Silas's strange, hand-drawn booklet of warding symbols, recalling his instructions to trace them with true intent at points of psychic disturbance. At one particularly oppressive junction of tunnels, where the air vibrated with an almost unbearable intensity, and shadowy forms seemed to coalesce from the damp walls, I stopped. With a piece of chalk I'd found in my camera bag, I painstakingly drew the most potent symbol from his book on the cold, wet stone. As I completed the final line of the intricate star-like glyph, a low groan emanated from the tunnel walls, and the oppressive atmosphere momentarily lifted, the shadowy forms recoiling as if from a sudden, unexpected light. The warding symbol, energized by my focused will, my desperate intent, had created a small, temporary sanctuary, a disruption in the entity's pervasive influence. It was a small victory, but it fueled my resolve. The entity, however, did not yield easily. As I pushed onwards, guided by the strange warmth of the mother-of-pearl button, which seemed to pulse in response to the entity's main energy currents, it launched a more direct personal assault. The image of Liam, my friend, appeared before me, his face pale and terrified, begging me to turn back, telling me I was lost, that this path led only to madness. His voice, so familiar, so filled with concern, almost broke my will. But I remembered Silas's warning. It will show you your deepest fear, and then it will offer you your most perfect dream. This vision of Liam, preying on my fear of causing harm to those I cared about, was another illusion, another desperate attempt to control me. I pushed through it, the image shattering like brittle glass as I invoked another of Silas's wards, my heart aching, but my purpose clear. I finally reached a critical nexus point Silas's notes had described as a convergence of old waterways and forgotten ley lines, a place directly beneath the foundations of the Redwater industrial complex, where my initial profound contact had occurred. The electrical hum here was deafening, the air thick with the scent of river mud, rusted metal, and that undeniable ancient power. This, I sensed, was a primary anchor for its connection to Redwater, and perhaps to me. Here, I knew, a simple, warding symbol would not be enough. I needed to sever this specific connection. Taking out my camera, the mother-of-pearl button pressed against its casing, I focused on a point where the foundations of Redwater met the ancient, unseen waterway, a place where the energy felt most concentrated, most malevolent. I didn't just want to document. I wanted to imprint, to define, to contain, with the revelatory power of captured light. As I prepared to take the shot, the entity manifested with a final, furious intensity. The ground trembled, the waters of the hidden channel churned violently, and a colossal, shadowy tendril, blacker than the surrounding darkness, erupted from the confluence, lashing towards me. I stood my ground, focused my lens, and as the tendril loomed, I released the shutter, the flash a defiant explosion of pure cleansing light in the suffocating gloom. The impact was immediate, visceral. The shadowy tendril shrieked, a sound that was both physical and psychic, and recoiled as if struck by lightning. The oppressive energy in the chamber fractured, the deafening hum dropping to a wounded, fading thrum. The intense feeling of being watched, of being psychically probed, lessened dramatically, replaced by a sense of a vast, ancient consciousness retreating in pain and confusion. I had not destroyed it. The urbis anima was too vast, too deeply woven into the fabric of Oakhaven for that. But I had severed a vital connection, perhaps the one through which it had most directly focused on me, had seen me through my Redwater photographs. The intense personal nature of the haunting, I prayed, was broken. The storm above, as if sensing this shift, began to lose its unnatural fury, the wind's howl softening, the rain easing. Exhausted beyond measure, my body aching, my mind scoured, I stumbled back through the now less menacing tunnels, following the faint, pre-dawn light that was beginning to filter down from distant grates. The city's underbelly felt quieter now, its ancient anger soothed or at least pushed back into a deeper slumber. The mother-of-pearl button in my pocket was cool, its gentle warmth expended, its purpose served. I emerged into a rain-washed Oakhaven, the sky above a pale, exhausted gray, the first true light of dawn breaking on the eastern horizon. The city felt different. The oppressive sense of being watched was gone, replaced by the familiar, impersonal hum of urban life. The shadows in the alleyways were just shadows, the reflections in the puddles just reflections. The immediate, terrifying threat had receded, but I knew this was not a true victory, not a final ending. The orbis anima, the collective consciousness of the city's forgotten remnants, was still there, woven into its ancient stones, its hidden waterways, its myriad untold stories. I had merely severed one of its tendrils, quieted one of its voices, pushed back one of its shadows. It would endure as it always had, a silent, watchful presence beneath the city's bustling facade. I was changed irrevocably. The city I had once loved for its decaying beauty, for its forgotten corners, now held a deeper, more unsettling resonance. My camera, once a tool for artistic exploration, now felt like an instrument of acute, almost painful, perception. Forever, attuned to the subtle frequencies of the unseen, to the lingering echoes of the city's hidden heart. The line between art and reality, between documentation and participation, had blurred forever. The mother-of-pearl button remained in my pocket, a small, tangible reminder of the thin veil between worlds, of the streets that appear in the mist, of the entities that feed on longing. And the small, dark stone from Mr. Silas Blackwood rested on my desk, a testament to ancient wisdom and the enduring power of belief. Oakhaven held its secrets close, but I now knew where to look, where to listen. The rain had stopped completely now, and a fragile, watery sunshine was beginning to touch the city's rooftops. My journey into the heart of its darkness was over, but the echoes of that journey, the knowledge of what lurked beneath the surface of the mundane, would linger for a lifetime. The city remnants were a part of me now, as I was perhaps a small, acknowledged part of them, and I would always be listening to the silence. The dawn still breaks on Oakhaven's weathered face. The rain still falls, a cleansing, gentle hand. But every shadow in this ancient place now speaks a language I can understand. The hum beneath the cobblestones remains, a sleeping titan, ancient and profound. But in my heart, no longer fear that reigns, just knowledge of the secrets I have found. My camera rests, its lens no longer blind to what the mist or fleeting glance conceals. It captured truth, a different way to bind the hungry, dark that through the city steals. The photographs, like windows to the soul of Oakhaven's remnants, hold a starker light, a story of a darkness taking its toll, and one small flash that pierced the endless night. The buttons gleam, the warding stones' cool weight are anchors to the world I thought I knew before I walked the paths of urban fate and saw the city's hidden heart break through. The urbis anima, though wounded, sleeps, its tendrils loosened from my fragile thread, and in the quiet that the city keeps, I walk aware, no longer filled with dread. For in that underbelly, dark and deep, I faced the echo of 1,000 fears, and woke from slumber that the city keeps, washing its old sorrows with new tears. Not mine of grief, but of a strength hard won, to see the darkness, yet to choose the day. My journey through the city's veins is done, but Oakhaven's secrets light my onward way.